So you want to start a podcast? That's too bad. Oh, actually, no. Yeah, we can probably help. Yeah. So this is a fairly simple 101-ish style overview of hopefully everything you would need to start a podcast. It won't necessarily be entirely free. I can't guarantee that you won't have to spend some money depending on what you already have. But it should give you everything you need to a little checklist of things to start. So, without further ado, let's kick it off. So we have an agenda here. We're going to learn about your idea, the reason you want to do a podcast, right? Who's the market? Who is your audience? Who wants to listen to your podcast, right? There's the tech, there's technology, software, right? Um, sorry, tech is probably hardware, I think, in this one. Production, I think, is like the actual production, including maybe software and everything. But like how, it's like the how do you how do you actually make an episode into something that you can release on a on your media host, right? That's the production, and then the drive, what actually keeps you doing it, right? Are you ready? Are you with me? All right, let's kick it off. And finally, actually, sorry, I guess before actually we kick anything off, what are my qualifications? Who cares? The the point really is that podcasting is meant to be an accessible way to put your voice out there. It's meant for really anybody to express themselves. And I understand that that means that there's a lot of crappy content out there. That means there's a ton of podcasts that are just absolute dog shit out there. And that's just a numbers game. That's just because if everybody and their dog can fairly easily record a podcast, you're going to end up with a lot of crappy podcasts because people don't have to think about it. So I could give my dog a podcast of his own. I don't have a dog, but if I had a dog, I could give my dog a podcast of his own, and somebody might listen to that. I don't know why, but they might. But there's nothing stopping you if you're the one willing to, sign up for the media host and pay for the media host to host your podcast for your dog. Nobody's stopping you. It's very, it's $10 or something like that a month, or less on, $5 a month on some sites, right? So, it's very easy to get into. So I don't really feel like you need to be qualified to give this presentation. This is just a how-to of just literally how I've managed to produce mine and like the technical steps. And I can't, success is just not even a metric here. I just like the drive at the end will mention some stats, but it really depends on like what you want to be doing. And if you're just trying to have fun, then who cares? If you're trying to make money, you can follow these steps and then monetize. But this is just like how you even get started, or how you even do, right? All right. So you need an idea. You may not have an idea, but you need an idea. You need to choose a niche. The idea here being that you need to kind of niche down into a topic that is not necessarily the more popular stuff, right? So, for instance, dog owners, big niche, lots of dog owners. Unfortunately, probably also lots of dog owner podcasts already. You're competing with a lot of probably good, the good ones have probably already bubbled to the top. There's nothing stopping you from competing with that. But that's going to be a much harder niche to get into or break out of, I guess, to like break out in, versus perhaps something more narrow, like dog owners in Vancouver, British Columbia. That's in Canada, for those of you who don't know that. So if you're talking specifically, if your podcast audience is specifically dog owners in Vancouver, BC, that's a little more narrow, and it's probably a smaller audience, right? Probably just people who live in BC or want to live in BC. Um, and it's less competitive because there's just it's a smaller pool, so there's just you have a shot at being one of the 50 people who make these podcasts for dog owners in Vancouver instead of the 5 million people who make podcasts for dog owners across the world, right? So there's a little bit more there. Maybe even dog owners in Vancouver who like to hike. Maybe your podcast is specifically calling out the best hikes for people who have dogs in Vancouver, the best hikes around Greater Vancouver, for dog owners. I think that's a great podcast idea, right? But you might not want to go all the way down into this level of niche, because if you get too narrow, there's the potential of like having an audience of you, really, like you and one other person, um, and you kind of pigeonhole yourself a little bit into like you might restrict your content selection depending on how far down the rabbit hole you go with your niche. So dog owners in Vancouver who love to go hiking, or dog owners in Vancouver, but dog owners in Vancouver who love to go hiking only in the rain might be a stretch. You might have an audience of two. You might not have any, if you're trying to make money at it, you might find that nobody is advertising to your specific audience. Just things like that. So these are just things to consider, right? You don't have to take my word for it, but just consider that you want to pick a niche that actually is potentially viable and has people that want to listen to your thing, right? And this is, again, assuming you don't already have an idea. If you have an idea, we can skip to the next section. So what about okay, so another example niche here is like gamers, but in this case tabletop gaming. That's a very specific different niche from just gamers in general, right? Because you guys, video game gamers, you could have war game gamers. This is tabletop miniature gamers, right? And in this case specifically, Warhammer 40K, perhaps the Space Marines. I think they're a faction in Warhammer 40K. So your podcast might be for specifically the people who play this faction in this game, and that audience is broad enough to be a massive market that what's the name of the company that makes Warhammer? At some point, it will come to me and I'll remember. But until I do, oh, it's on the tip of my tongue too. Anyway, they make mad money selling their Warhammer stuff to people. Like it's a thriving tabletop like miniature game thing. My friends play it. They spend thousands of dollars on their miniatures. They paint them. They do tournaments. There's markets for this, right? There might not be a market. There might not be an audience for maybe only the blue Space Marines. There might be. I think actually there probably would be, because if I understand correctly, there actually is a whole thing about that. But when I made this slide, I didn't know that. So my point here was not to make that point, but to specifically say you might not want to niche down this far. That's all. Finally, homeowners, right? That's pretty broad. But homeowners in the UK, less broad, more narrow, right? Better niche, more accessible. Specifically, homeowners in the UK looking to rent out their second property. All right, now you have an audience where there's definitely like people who have, this makes sense. There's people who do this thing or in the need of this thing. Now, perhaps you can, come up with your podcast. But if it's for the age range of maybe folks that are 35 to 37 with no children, that's really narrow, and you're leaving out a whole bunch of people who might have had a windfall early, or might be finally retiring with their second property. So again, you might not want to niche down too far. You might be locking yourself out of both audience and content. All right, you with me? If you had your idea already, you can basically just skip everything I just said. Onto the market. Who is your audience? First of all, you're going to have to ask. So you need to actually get an idea from some real people as to whether this is viable, right? So you need to also ask people who are not close family to you, because these usually these people will be nice to you, which is lovely. They should be nice to you. You should be nice in general. But that doesn't help you in this case when you need like actual critical, uh, like a dissection essentially of your content. You need somebody who's willing to say, you know what, I felt it was kind of boring when you just went on about blah, or your music doesn't really work with the show, or your volume was way off compared to the your guest, or just you need somebody who's going to tell you that kind of stuff, right? And you won't get that kind of you usually won't get that kind of interaction from your friends and family. You usually need to go outside. So you need to test the waters a little bit by maybe it's kind of tough. You either start a podcast that you're willing to discard such that you can because the also idea is that you don't necessarily want to start with this being your very first attempt at recording anything either. So you need to I also wouldn't necessarily present a very unpolished copy of whatever you're trying to produce to the people that you're trying to get criticism from, right? You want to make sure that it's the most polished thing that you would expect to, you would go as far as like mastering it as if you were about to upload it. And then you need to find a peer group that is willing to give you criticism in a productive fashion, right? So I know that's a tough one, but it's like, friends of friends work. Sometimes coworkers, but not at work. Obviously like outside of a work setting, because you don't want to get in like weird hot water with taking up their time at the office. But there's just like there's a certain connection that you probably have to people who could potentially give you this feedback, even if that's just strangers online before you launch, before you actually upload the episode. So that might be people on Facebook, in a Facebook group or something like that, right? That kind of thing. So you have to find this is a tough one, because if you want real feedback, you're going to have to seek out real feedback, right? All right. Finally, not finally. I keep saying finally. I just want it to be over. No, I don't know. I'm tired. The tech. There's a lot to go over here, but I think this is a fun section. There's a lot of cool stuff in here. Okay. You're going to need a microphone. I know. Weird. You're going to be talking into what? Yeah, I guess. Yeah, you'll need a microphone, right? Some really popular microphones for podcasting are listed. So the Samson Q2U is an incredibly popular mic because it's decently cheap. It's like, I think it's like under $100 on Amazon, and it has USB. So you do not need to have an interface to run it. That is a very big bonus for a lot of people, because a lot of people don't have all of the audio equipment that you need to do music through your computer or record stuff through your computer properly. So they need a mic that they can just literally plug in to a USB port on their computer and hope that it sounds great. And the Samson Q2U is one of those microphones. So is the Audio-Technica ATR 2100X, which I have right here. Look at that. Yeah, you can even see it. I bought this baby because as soon as I saw that it was out there for a decent price, I think I paid like 120 Canadian or something for this. Anyway, it was also, I don't know. I think I've thrown around different prices for what I paid for this, but it was a very reasonable price. I have this. I've used this at work for recording podcasts at work. It is great. Plugs into USB. Also has an XLR connector on it, so you can plug it into an actual interface if you have an interface or a mixer or whatever, right? but it's a great cheap little option. The Samson QTU, same kind of thing, right? These mics, they might not look like much. They do look very like stage micy, same as the Shure SM58 that I mentioned here, or the XM8500, because I have the XM8500s, and both the XM8500 and the Audio Technica ATR 2020, they look like that kind of stage mic that you would see at a rock concert or something, right? The very typical like gray, grill, the circular, the ball grill at the end, right? So that's pretty typical, but they don't look like a lot, but they work really really well. They're durable. So I highly recommend, if you have an interface already. So for instance, on the right, I've listed some interfaces. The Focusrite Scarlett Solo is like incredibly common in the hobby space because it's decently affordable. So I think the Solo is around $200. The 2i2 is like 300, somewhere in there. Get yourself a Zoom Pod Track P4, or if you really want to drop some money, you can buy a Rodecaster if you really really want to. Or technically, you can use your phone. So like if you have the USB ones, USB-C plugging into your phone, and if you just like run like the recording program, like because most phones, I have one on mine. It's just like an audio recording. You just hit record and it records whatever's coming into the mic. Well, that will immediately switch to the mic that you've just plugged in. So it just works. It just works. The other thing you can do, you can get yourself something like a Fifine, and I don't even know if this is a brand that you have to pay attention to, but these kind of things, these little portable mixer USB interface dealies, they're cheap. They feel cheap, but they serve a purpose, and that is that, immediately via USB-C, you can plug this into a phone. This has an XLR interface on it right there. So you can plug this into a phone and have a mixer powered by your phone that you can plug a real XLR microphone into, like one of these Behringers, like the XM8500s, or a Shure SM58, or whatever other, mic you have that uses XLR. You can plug it into that and then have a proper mixer just recording directly into your phone. I've used it in a pinch. It worked really well, like incredibly well. The audio was really good because these mics, even in a semi-treated environment, these mics are very good for like not picking up off axis. So if you just make sure that they're like directly in the person's face and the person's talking loud into that mic, that is the only thing it's picking up. So it was like at the end of a little like LAN party that we had for fun, I had this hooked up. And I was just interviewing people at the end, like the winners of the various games we played at the LAN party, and the audio was like crystal clear. It was incredible. It was just so cool. So if you don't have an audio interface, you can grab yourself one of these microphones that has USB. There's also a lot of other options out there for USB mics because they're marketed often to gamers. So you can find them on Amazon or other Best Buy, Walmart, whatever. All the electronic sections at your or your favorite place will have them. But like lots of try to think, Elgato. I think Shure also has some other USB options. So there's lots of USB options if you just want to go that route. Just be aware, you're trading. There's trade-offs. There's pros and cons. But for the most part, the USB mics are great, especially if you're just getting started. If that's your roadblock, just get the cheapest, most accessible option you can, which is probably just a Samson Q2U or the Audio Technica. Plug it directly in, point it at your face, talk. Then you're podcasting. That's it, right? All right. Software wise, oh my gosh, there's so much software. Okay, on the audio side, there's just a million options. On the PC, and I guess all of these also exist on Mac, or most of them exist on Mac too. So you have the very common audio ones are Audacity and Reaper. Audacity is, I think I have both of these installed on my PC. They're both just very light. Audacity especially is just very light. It's very easy and quick to open. Gives you a fairly obvious at a glance interface of like what you're about to be doing with it, right? Whether you're about to, edit something or cut something to pieces. The menu that has all of the like the effects you can apply is all in one place. So like if you just want to do simple edits, that kind of stuff, there's a million courses on how to use Audacity to produce your podcast. There's a podcast called the Audacity to Podcast. I think that's what it's called. And it's literally about producing a podcast with Audacity. That's why it's called that. So, these things exist. Audacity is great software. Reaper is also great software. Audacity is fully free. Reaper has an unlimited trial that gives you a nag screen, and then you can get rid of it for I think for like $60 for a personal edition, which is very reasonable considering what it is. Reaper is a free a DAW, like digital audio workstation, that has basically all the bells and whistles you'd expect from the big dogs. It's just that it is a little more open source looking. But it is a very like it's a much more accessible for that price point, at least, piece of software than something like Adobe Audition or like Ableton or stuff like that. You can use it for VST plugins. So if you're just looking for something to host your VST plugins that you've collected and just apply those to tracks, Reaper is great for that. It'll load in your plugins and you can apply it to a track or clip, whatever. It works perfectly. But it's also just like very powerful software for what it is, and I think it often gets overlooked because it looks a little bit janky, but under the hood there's tons of stuff you can do with Reaper, and there's tons of content out there about what you can do with Reaper. So I think Reaper deserves a look. I think it definitely deserves a look. On Mac there is GarageBand. It's free. It comes with your Mac. It is just as powerful as a bunch of other stuff. I mean, people have literally produced their band's music on GarageBand, right? So definitely check that out on Mac. It comes with your Mac, and that's, again, if your only roadblock is that you don't know what audio software to use and you have a Mac, you probably have GarageBand. Learn it. Boom. Add some music around the edges, the ends, the beginning and the end of your talking, and you have a podcast. I mean, boom, right? Finally, for spending money, you got Adobe Audition, obviously. And I mean, if you want to go like, you can go Cubase, maybe not Cubase, but maybe, I mean, if you really want to go, you can like use actual music production software or something if you really, need to. But really, you're just looking for something that lets you edit a waveform, maybe apply compression, de-essing, whatever, that kind of stuff. And that could be as simple as Audacity, right? On the video recording side, before we get into video editing, because there's a lot again, right? The video recording side, we have OBS. OBS is probably the most prevalent recording software on computer, I would assume. Probably, right? It is free. It has a learning curve. The slickness factor is probably not there at all. But again, it is free. It is very accessible. It has a million plugins that the various community members have produced over the years. And it's been through like 30 something versions to get where it is now. So it's pretty powerful software. It allows you to record in just about any fashion on your computer, and using recording audio, recording video, recording multiple cameras, recording multiple scenes, recording nested scenes, all this kind of stuff you can do. When I'm not using Ecamm Live on my Mac, I'm using OBS, because OBS just can't be beat for power when it comes to sheer versatility. That's OBS hands down. But you're trading convenience for that versatility. It's like you have to maybe have 15 different plugins that do the things you want to make it look really slick. And it might eat up all the horsepower on your machine by doing those actions or something, but you can do them, right? For free. That's the important part. All right. XSplit. I feel like it's kind of dropped off. It still exists. It's still a thing that people use. But I feel like I just kind of forget to go back to it. XSplit is another broadcasting software, screen recording software. Used to compete as like the paid option compared to OBS when it came to the gaming streaming world. So if you were a game streamer and you weren't using OBS, you might be using XSplit because it had a bunch of like whiz bang features that OBS could have, but in OBS required you to jump through some more hoops. And in XSplit, they were just kind of built in. Like I remember before OBS had a plugin for like for like turning your scene into a 3D scene. XSplit could just do that. So if I had my camera on the screen like it is right now in XSplit, before OBS could do it in XSplit, I could just like I could like rotate on the Z axis, so it looked like I'm like rotating towards you until I'm like paper thin, and then rotating, and so like you could do this kind of like you could have me um partially rotated at an angle so it looks like I'm looking in at the content that we're looking at or something from a certain view. So there's just stuff like that that you could do natively with XSplit just from the way the set up the scene. Didn't really, I mean, it didn't make it worthwhile enough for me to use it over other things because it was still a like it still took a lot of horsepower to run XSplit. OBS, I mean, as well at the time, but XSplit always felt like it took more for some reason. I don't know if it did or if it was just my perception, but my perception was that XSplit felt heavier, like it was more resource intensive than OBS. That's what it felt like. So I never really stuck with it, but it was an option. It is out there. You can consider it. Ecamm Live on macOS only is what we're using right now to bring the show to you. Haha. I don't have an affiliate link. I'm not paid by them. I'm just telling you. So Ecamm Live is just a Mac OS paid broadcasting / screen recording software. It's Mac native, so it's kind of got like the Mac look and feel with like everything's a floating window. It's got nice big buttons for certain things. It's got a million options. I do not have I don't have like the pro subscription or whatever the next subscription up is. So there's a bunch of options I don't have access to, but there's a ton of stuff I do have access to, and it's pretty neat, right? It's pretty good for what I do have access to. What was that? There it is. Oh, you know when you catch a hair and then you can't. Oh no. Oh, I did catch it. Oh, thank goodness. All right. Oh, phew. Oh, yeah. So it's good. It's very good software. I mean, I don't know if it fully justifies the price when you could just use stuff like OBS, but the fact that it's paid means that you don't really have to do nearly as much setup. You just kind of, you've got a couple scenes to begin with. You just turn it on, set up, you basically just choose your camera source, choose your microphone source, and it just kind of works. And with the Mac, you get the added bonus of having things like the background that you see behind me is not even specifically an Ecamm virtual green screen. It's actually my Mac's virtual green screen. So I'm just leveraging the fact that the Mac will do a virtual green screen behind a camera as like a overall API thing that it just does. So I've enabled that via the camera API. And then I'm just leveraging that in Ecamm. So instead of having, in OBS or Ecamm, instead of setting up some sort of green screen effect, I'm actually just passing through my virtual green screen camera from the Mac OS directly, into OBS or Ecamm in this case. And Ecamm just says, oh, well, that's just your camera. And it doesn't have to do any extra post-processing via Ecamm, even though I guess my Mac is doing a little bit of extra post-processing on the camera itself. So it's just, things like that. Just kind of neat, right? And then there's also online sites that you can use for it. So like StreamYard. StreamYard is a pretty common one. If you've ever seen like a podcast interview style talking head on like your talking head video on YouTube with two people just like side by side with some clean-ish looking frames around them. very common to be using StreamYard for that, because StreamYard just gives you a virtual studio and you just bring your guests onto it and they get a link and it just clicks them into the browser in this nice virtual studio that looks like that. So them, they're just seeing on the screen this lovely virtual, green, this, two camera setup. And it's presented to the audience that way. You can hook up a bunch of different outputs to it. So you can hook up YouTube and Twitch and Kick and LinkedIn and Facebook and all these other sites to it, so that it all streams out to them at the same time, and gives you this like one-stop shop for producing your little like talking head interview style show. Very common, reasonably priced, but they got bought out and the price has changed drastically. So I think they had a $10 price plan for a long time, and now it's a $40 price plan or something like that. I think if you're a business, the price is a little bit more reasonable, but for the hobbyist, it might not be an option anymore. So you might want to be looking at, there's what I didn't consider, I didn't throw in here because I didn't know it at the time, is one called EV Mux. That's EVE Victor, Edward Victor, Mux, MUX, Mary, what's utility, Mary utility xylophone. there's my NATO alphabet for you for today. EV Mux is basically a clone of StreamYard. So and it doesn't cost as much. It's like $20. So if you're looking for a StreamYard alternative that is not StreamYard, evmux.com, I think it's .com, is an alternative. There's also Riverside and Boomcaster. I think Riverside, or maybe it's I think Squadcast is another one. Squadcast is now part of Descript. And Descript, I should have mentioned, Descript is a really cool piece of editing software too. So once we'll get into the video editing here. So for actual like video editing, we have DaVinci Resolve, which is essentially it's a free movie like editing software. It is on par with Adobe Premiere, in my opinion, for features and quality and like what you can produce. I used to use Resolve. I've swapped freely between producing my videos in Resolve or Adobe Premiere. They are both great. One is paid, one is not. But yeah, don't if you're just looking for a free option, DaVinci Resolve is free and incredibly powerful. So I wouldn't even waste your time worrying about how to get a free copy of Adobe Premiere. Just get a DaVinci Resolve, watch some videos on how to produce video in DaVinci Resolve if you're looking to do video, and you're set. I mean, it's just you do not need to look elsewhere. It has amazing audio editing stuff in there because it'll hook into like their version of how Adobe Premiere hooks into Adobe Audition. They'd have the same kind of thing with DaVinci Resolve hooking into their audio program. They also have effects, like you can do Adobe After Effects style stuff in Adobe or in DaVinci Resolve using their engine for that. They have a lighting. It's just, yeah, highly recommend. Do not turn up your nose at DaVinci Resolve. It is a great video editing piece of software. Adobe Premiere is on here because it is a standard. It is not free. I use it alternatively, right? I alternate between it and DaVinci Resolve. It's standard. It does the job. It is expensive. Final Cut Pro I've never used, but I've heard that it is, if you know how to use it and that's your bread and butter, then use that. Just use what you're good at. The whole point is to unlock your potential here, right? So just use what you're good at. And then CapCut is a free video software, video editing software that is like, it's common for like people make like memes. They cut their memes with it because it has a lot of meme templates and stuff. But it's also a fully fledged video editor. It has a bunch of neat little features that you can quickly do some stuff like cutouts. You can quickly do a background cutout, foreground cutout, that kind of stuff with it. There's a bunch of, because it's often used for making memes and other like quick formatting, quick styles like that. There's a lot of really cool little like one-stop features that you can do, or like with the cutouts and with some other stuff, where you can make these like snappy promo style videos often that you'll see to like either as a commercial or even just to do like a how-to, those really nice how-tos you see on a product where it like the product moves away in some fancy fashion. CapCut's great at doing transitions and little animations and stuff like that just look really slick with very little effort because it had tons of like motion graphic type stuff built into it. You got to check out CapCut if you're looking for like modern, cool video editing that isn't as maybe in depth as Adobe Premiere. Then just like work with CapCut, see what you can do with CapCut because you can do things fast in CapCut, and you can make them look really slick really quickly if you learn the tricks. And there's tons of tricks to learn, and there's tons of content in there to leverage because there's just tons of like templates. CapCut gets slept on, I think, because there's a certain generation that probably likes to pretend that it doesn't exist, but it's good at what it does. And I think people are missing out when they choose not to use CapCut. And finally, Descript. I wanted to mention Descript earlier. So Descript is video and audio editor. It turns your content into like a word processor, so that you can, like, if you delete, like I said, it'll transcribe what you've done and then lay it out in like a Word format, so you can go and like edit and change, and it's all like it's a Word document. But when you do that, it edits the audio and the video to chop it up according to what you've deleted. Now in audio, that's not such a big deal. You can tell, but it's less jarring than watching somebody do this a bunch on video when they've been cut to pieces because you've removed all the ums and ahs from your podcast. So you can do things like that, but just be aware that that editing style is harsh when done in video. So just pay attention to the choppiness of your cuts, because some of those features, like, it will offer to delete all the filler words for you, which will sound like it'll sound great. It makes everybody sound very intelligent, like nobody's having to think about what they're talking about. They know everything they want to talk about right off the top of their head. But if you look at them on video, they're going to be dancing around the screen from all the cuts that you've done on video. So you have to consider these things as being like separate. So you might want to edit your audio into Script and then like do that for a specific release, and maybe you can do what you want, but just be aware that's what happens. Adobe Podcast also lets you do that, but I don't think they support video, or at least I've never used it for video. But for audio, that's what I've used to produce my podcast in the past as well. Is just uploading the like recording into Adobe Podcast, so that it transcribes as you're going, and then I can clean up my mistakes just by backspacing a word, and it just cuts me from having said that word. I don't know if they support the thing. So Descript has this feature where you can train it to sound like you and then use it to generate words that you've like misspoken. I don't know if Adobe Podcast has that feature yet, but I assume they're all going to have that, because like 11 Labs is at the point where it's, you could have entire voices that are just cleanly, somebody else's AI voice, or like Google Notebook, where it'll make a podcast that sounds like a podcast, but it's about some topic, right? So if these can do it, it's just a matter of time before everybody's doing some sort of AI to help. Either it's like, if you just have it say things a little bit differently, so like it doesn't have to, or if you swore, you're not supposed to swear, they just have it say a different word instead of saying that word. Or, I don't know. These are all coming, right? All right. Production. How? You need to find a host, and you need to upload your first episode, right? So you've used one of these pieces of software and one of these pieces of equipment to record yourself talking, interviewing, singing, laughing, whatever it is. You've got the raw material. You've run it through some editing. You've removed the boring parts. You've maybe applied some mastering and maybe some effects to it. Maybe you've added some compression to it. Maybe you've added a limiter to it, right? Now what? What do I do with it? And also, oh, I guess before, okay, so I feel like I've jumped around a bit here because one is like, what do I do with it? But the other is also like, how do I structure my show? And I feel like that question is really open. It really depends on what you want to be doing, right? And also, it doesn't really matter really because it's your thing. So, like, you could just set that bar to be something else, right? If you are just gonna, talk into the microphone for half an hour and tell a story, then that's the format of your show. It doesn't have to have an intro. It doesn't have to have an outro. These are things that I spent, I think, way too long worrying about before I took action. Um, I was trying to line up everything that I thought I needed. I thought I was looking up examples of how people have like, well, do I talk about this first or do I wrap it up with this? And my first couple episodes, like you can probably tell that I wasn't really sure. I had an idea how I wanted to enter into things and exit like topics, but I wasn't really sure. But then eventually the intro and the outro for my content in that season specifically just became um a piece of like how do I describe this? It just became rote, right? Like I just it was just that was just a thing that happened around the content that I had chosen for that episode. It's like the intro would just kind of write itself based on the fact that I wanted to talk about something. And in the previous episode, we had talked about something else. And I wanted to make sure that you knew that so you could go back and listen to that other something else if you wanted to. But if you were here for this, then you might learn about this and this and this today. And let's get into that. And so, like, I think I spent way too long figuring out or trying to figure out how to how to do that. And the reality was like it didn't really matter because I was going to figure it out. It was just going to be part of the process of like talking to, about the topic. You do some editing later and then you figure it out. So I think the lesson here is like you don't really have to worry about the how do I lay out my first episode because you can do a bunch of editing afterwards. So it doesn't matter if you record it and then you want to record an intro or an outro, or you want to like move things around. You don't have to do anything with what you've recorded. You're not obligated to upload what you've recorded. You can sit on what you've recorded for months if you want to and dice it up 8 million ways and see if you want to have it this way. But also don't do that. Like don't spend that long because it's not worth it. Um, if you're not confident with it the first time, try editing a couple ways, but then also just try re-recording it and see if you feel better about it the second time around you've recorded it. Try recording it a third time, maybe a fourth or fifth. Like it took me a while before my takes felt like they were less error prone and more natural. And all of those things along the way made me feel better about wanting to actually use that content and edit that content and move that content around and like listen to that elsewhere and play with that here. So I think it's like, don't spend too long worrying about the, like, do I do an intro here or an outro here? Just like record the actual thing that you want to get out there and then play around with the editing process and learn the editing process. And while you're learning the editing process, you can then figure out if you need to do an intro for your thing that you recorded, or if you want to scrap it entirely and record a new one or whatever, right? It's just gonna be a part of that process. But the faster you dive into doing that, the faster you get closer to your actual goal of uploading and releasing this podcast in the first place, right? So to move on from the how do I lay out my first episode and the fact that you shouldn't spend too long on it, you do though have to find a host to upload your episode to, and you will need to consider some needs that you might have for the host, right? If you're looking for free, they do exist. They're just not plentiful. I think there's one that I'm aware of. There's one media host, I think, that I'm aware of that will do free podcast hosting for you, and that is, I think it's called Red Circle. Red Circle. And you have to hunt around on their website to find the free plan. If I understand correctly, it's like buried on their website, the free plan. But it exists. You can get it. I think it's ad supported in some fashion. I don't know if they inject them. There's something going on there to pay for it, obviously. So like, you are the product. Just keep that in mind. If it's the free plan, you are the product. So just, your people listening to your podcast might pick up on that, right? But if you can't afford it, that's an option. You obviously, if you can't afford it, then that's what you're stuck with, right? But so then moving on, if you can afford to pay for one, if you need a place that can have multiple team members, that might exclude certain media hosts. Certain media hosts are considering you to just be a single entity managing your podcast. You log in with a single user account and you manage your collection of podcasts with that single account. There's no way to create sub users or a team or add separate billing or any of that stuff. So you have to, some might have that, some might not. Some have better statistics tracking, some don't. I use OP3 statistics tracking for mine, but my podcast host has decent stats as well on their side. OP3 is kind of neat because it is host agnostic, and there's these host agnostic analytics. Basically, is like you get this prefix from OP3. Like when you go to the website and you set up your podcast on the analytics, they give you a prefix. You go to your podcast host and they'll sometimes have a setting where you can actually put a prefix. Sometimes you have to tell support that you'd like to add a prefix, but it's just like an HTTP blah 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 subdomain that you put in front of. Basically, you just put it in this field on your web host on the config somewhere, and it gets injected to the front of your MP3 file or whatever the file format is that your podcast is in when it's distributed. So your podcast ends up being distributed through OP3's like proxy essentially, and that counts the download. And that's how the metrics are actually tracked, because then they have full access to see when it was downloaded, how much of the file was downloaded, all that kind of stuff. And then they can tell you that on their website for free. So I use OP3, highly recommend. But if you're looking for stats on a specific podcast host, then I would consider browsing around through the hosts and seeing who has better stats, because Libsyn, you pay, I think Libsyn has like a $5 plan that has no statistics. And if you want stats, you need their $7 plan. So these are just like little things to consider, that not every host offers all of the same things for the same price points. You're not necessarily getting statistics and a website and this and that on your media host, right? Same thing for a help desk. They might be a small operation that has one support person, might not be able to get to all of your support requests right off the bat. Depends whether you need a company that can offer like an SLA for uptime, that kind of stuff. Like will my podcast always be available? What happens if my podcast is not available due to an error on your guys' site? If you're a business, that's something that probably appeals to you more, is to have accountability from the host, right? Some hosts probably don't offer that. Some hosts probably don't actually care to engage in that kind of level of uptime and service level offering and that kind of stuff. So you if that matters to you, you might have to seek out a specific host, right? Social media sharing, same thing. Some hosts don't have all the buttons. Is it just storming out there, or is it just okay? Weird. I can't tell if it's actually like pouring rain out there. If it's just anyway. Yeah. So some don't have all the buttons and stuff that make it easy to share your podcast out there. Some have transcription options, some do not. Some have ad insertion, some do not. So again, these are all things you have to just kind of consider a little bit. Oh, my mouse is dead? What happened to my mouse? Oh, uh-oh. Where'd my mouse go? Oh, no. All right. So those are just things you have to consider. I am currently using, I think I've moved to Captivate I've been through Libsyn and Podbean. I have no beef with any of those. I just also like fancy, shiny new things. And Captivate happens to have a really nice UI and some fancy features that make it kind of cool. Like one of the nice things about Captivate is that there's no limit on the number of podcasts that you have under your account. It's just the number of downloads, I believe. So if you don't cross some magic number of downloads, you can have 10 podcasts under your account and you'll never incur any extra fees or anything on that. And I think that's kind of nice actually, because my main podcast is not doing exceptional download numbers or anything. I don't even consider it, like, that's not even how I gauge the success of that podcast. So I'm not worried about creeping past some number and being charged or anything like that on Captivate. Plus, they've got a method of inserting dynamic ads in certain places. And I like the idea of utilizing that to insert stuff for my own stuff. Like, I don't want ads. I don't want actual ads in there, but I would like to use it to say, hey, there's for the, I don't know, I'm accepting comments on blah, blah, blah for this question, which is only relevant for like a month. And then I would rotate that out for a new thing of like, what if we talked about blah, right? And so just stuff like that, where you can make like real, like current content you can turn like past content into like relevant current content. Like if somebody's listening to one of my old podcast episodes with one of those current not ads, but like current audio segments injected into it in an ad spot where it's asking about a question or it's saying, come comment on our website. Maybe in that past episode, I didn't even have a website yet, but because I'm injecting the audio into these little bookmarked chapter places in the episode, a listener who's listening to my first episode could hear that I have a website, and they could then visit the website and check out, the website, even though technically I don't think I mentioned the website until like the third or fourth episode, right? In the actual audio of the podcast. So just cool stuff like that you can leverage on your different podcast hosts. So I've listed some here: Libsyn, Captivate, Podbean. Spotify actually has a free offering. Oh, I forgot that Spotify is one of the free ones. Oh my God, that's like a huge miss on my part. Red Circle, Spotify for creators is another freebie. If you're willing to let Spotify control and host your audio and potentially disappear it overnight if they feel like it, which is true of any of them, but it's a little bit more true of Spotify. You can host via Spotify, and there's a little, it used to be Anchor, but then they bought Anchor, and then they slowly turned all of the Anchor things into Spotify branded stuff. And now it is just Spotify for creators. There's like a different app on your phone for it. There's a different side of the website for it, but it's pretty straightforward. You just like log in via that method, name your podcast, drop the file in, or like tell it you want to add a new episode, drop the file in, etc. It's just like other hosts, but it's just through Spotify. And then Spotify gives you the RSS feed, and from there you can share it to all the other sites. That is something I don't actually mention here, but I should have mentioned here. So what happens is you upload your podcast to your media host, and now it's just sitting on your media host. Now, if that's Spotify, then it's actually, published on Spotify and accessible on Spotify. If that's not Spotify, and it's something like Captivate or Podbean or Libsyn or Buzzsprout, and you're not using any of their like one-click options to spread your podcast, then it is not automatically published to places like Spotify or Apple or Amazon. So check that. Make sure to check in your hosting, in your media host, check and make sure that it is either, because some of them will automatically do that for the big three, and others will leave it to you to do all of the work. So one of the things that you might have to do is set up individual accounts, and you should, on all of those major, where you get your podcast type sites. So for instance, Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Music, iHeartRadio. I'm sure I'm forgetting one. Anyways, those are some big ones right there. You need to log in. You need to set up a podcaster account on each of those. You need to log in, do the import thing. They will often have a thing where you could just, you paste in your RSS feed and they verify. Sometimes they'll ask you to turn on a setting on your media host where you like enable the email address, and then you put in your email address, and then you just put in what your email address is on the other site just to make sure, or it matches it to whatever you've already signed in with your account. And it goes, okay, that email address that you have on file is the same email address that's in that podcast RSS feed that you just gave us. So yes, you do own this, and yes, we will publish your show to our network. Within a few hours, it'll be available. And then you can check and search on their network and see if you can find your podcast. And usually within a little bit of time, you can. Some of them take longer, some of them take days. But you want to at least get it onto Apple and Spotify and Amazon Music and iHeart, because from there's a good chance that others will simply be able to find you. If you're in Apple Music or Spotify, for instance, you are accessible to a majority of the people listening to podcasts out there, simply because, well, A, a lot of them are on Apple Music or Spotify, and B, a lot of those other websites use Apple Music or Spotify as their like library index of podcasts. So there's some of those sites will tell you, because depending on your media host might actually have a a link that says, or a list of all the sites that you can click on to go set up an account and go publish your podcast to, right? But some of them you'll go do that, and they'll say, oh, if you're published on Apple Music, you can find your podcast with us already. Just, search here. If you found it, make an account, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, I definitely recommend Apple Music, Spotify, iHeartRadio, just right off the top. Just immediately, if you can get yourself onto those, your exposure becomes a lot easier. It just, because the spread, the amount of people that are on those networks, the fact that the other apps are pulling from those indexes, just means that your job gets a lot easier if you're on those big ones to begin with, right? All right. The Drive. There are, at any one time, around 4 million active global podcasts. When I produced this report, there were only about 64% of Americans had listened to a podcast in 2023. 44% of podcasts on Apple had less than 3 episodes. So that means almost half of the podcasts out there had less than 3 episodes, which means if you produce 3 episodes, you are already like way beyond what other folks have put out there, right? Biggest podcast category by percentage is comedy, but comedy is a broad category. A lot of like, if you looked at like, on Twitch, it would be like the just chatting category, like we're in right now. That category is incredibly broad on Twitch, to the point where Twitch has categories like I don't know, development, where you're still really just talking and typing. But now it's like, well, you're talking and typing about a specific thing, so we'll call that this. Or there's a category on Twitch for like hot tub streams or something. And again, you're just talking, but now you're talking in a hot tub. And these are all just like things that you don't have in the podcast categorization. So the comedy ends up being everything from like actual comedy, like stand-up, comedians, to like roundtable discussions that are only labeled comedy because it's like there's no other category for people having a casual conversation about something with the occasional person being funny about it. Like there's just no, it's like they don't want to call it politics because it's not really about politics, and there's no category for like sitting around a table talking about current events. So we'll just call it comedy. So comedy is broad. Yeah, just keep that in mind. It's just there's some categorization issues going on there, maybe. Finally, number of active podcasts on Apple by percentage is only 17. So only 17% of the podcasts that you can find right now on Apple Music or Apple Podcasts, I guess, are considered active. And active has been published in the last 90 days. So 3 months. If they publish an episode in the last 3 months, which I don't even think I fall into that category anymore because I haven't finished season 2 of my podcast yet. And finally, podcasts with more than 10 episodes is only around 720K total. That's a small number considering how many are out there and how many are like currently being, because with the stat I don't have is like how many podcasts are popping up every month. How many new ones are popping up every month, right? It's a lot. There's a lot out there. There's a lot. And so my goal when I saw that original number was to do at least 10 episodes. I wanted my season to have 10 episodes. 10, not just because of this number, but also because there's another stat I've seen where it's like, most podcasts don't make it past 7 or something. So I wanted to get an even 10. I like round numbers, so 10 felt good. And then I ended up, feeling like I was more of a statistic because I hit that 10. And I'd like to think I'd like to do another 10 for the next season too. But yeah, this was fun. This was a fun presentation on podcasting 101, right? We covered all these, how to choose a niche if you don't have an idea yet, right? Covered how to get some feedback on it and like your audience and what your audience is going to say. We covered equipment, how to get the right gear, or at least some starting gear, some accessible gear. Covered software, video and audio. We covered the basics of choosing your host, what to do with your first episode, and how not to fret too much over it, right? And we covered some numbers at the end here, which I think really outlined that there's nothing stopping any of us from really getting into that. I like it. Cool. That's fun. Let's see if I can get out of that. That was actually really cool. Man, I'm trying to think when I gave that presentation too. It was, I want to say like a year ago, probably, at least now. And I've learned a lot since then. I've listened to a lot of podcasts about podcasting since then. And things have, I mean, the software that I recommended, the stuff that I recommended is all pretty common, even to this day. And I mean, so we had some updates in there, right? I mentioned EVMux as being a current alternative to StreamYard. StreamYard, the pricing has changed and the ownership of StreamYard has changed. They got bought, so they may not maintain quality. We'll have to see how that turns out. But EVMux is a good alternative there. So, we called out some changes, but for the most part, like things like Audacity, the Adobe suite, if you've already paid for it, those are all staples. Like those are all tried, tested, true pieces of this that you don't need to, if you have access to those, you're already leagues ahead immediately. You have access, you're leagues ahead already, right? If you have access to a microphone of any, we didn't even cover this one. Okay, so the one I'm talking into right now is, I can show you here. Oh, you can't see it because it's mirrored. All right, well that's kind of silly. This is the P420. This is the AKG P420, and this particular microphone, I think I've talked about it a little bit before. This particular microphone has been modded to sound like it sounds right now. Before that, it sounded different. Now, okay, and this isn't going to have nearly the same effect as it would if I actually could show you what that sounded like. But essentially, when I first got this microphone, I would not have ever thought to use it for this purpose. I mean, you could, and it would be fine. I'm sure some people's ears would be fine with that. My ears, nope. Really, it felt a little bit too harsh on the high end. There was just something about it. It just did not. I don't know. And I saw an article about modding this mic, and like all you needed to do was add one little tiny extra capacitor. I think it was a capacitor that we added, and all of a sudden it changes the waveform to be much more like a vintage Neumann from a certain era, which is like a highly sought after multi-thousand-dollar microphone. And I so I watched some videos and I followed a new YouTube channel. I actually learned and followed a new YouTube channel strictly from watching some videos about it. But I watched some videos about performing the modification and the before and the after. So the videos would have a before where they're talking into the microphone and then switching back and forth between their normal everyday microphone and this microphone. And then they modded it and then showing again afterwards. And the difference after they modded it was night and day difference to my ears, at least. It was just like, oh my God, this went from sounding harsh and just like, I don't know, a little bit unpleasant to very pleasant and like, wow. So I enlisted the help of my friend and we went to his place. Yeah, and we just popped it onto his desk and he took it apart, soldered in the extra piece, put it back together, tested it, worked great, brought it home. I've been using it ever since for this particular broadcast. And I think it sounds great now. I think it sounds a lot more manageable. I have to do a lot less on the channel strip to make it sound good, in my opinion. I think it sounds great right off the bat. So I think I don't know. There's stuff like if you have access to projects like that where you can, get this $200 and something microphone and mod it into a $5,000 microphone, do that. If that's going to get you talking into something and producing content, do it, right? Don't let that stop you. Don't let any of this stop you, right? Like again, the Audio Technica ATR 2100. This is like under $100. This is a very accessible microphone too, right? All of these super accessible. If you just want to sound half decent, just get yourself one of these, plug it in, and use Audacity, Reaper, whatever the free stuff we talked about. Hit record, start talking, see how you sound, do a little bit of editing, and eventually get to something you want to upload, right? You upload, you copy and paste your RSS link around to your different, to Spotify and to Apple Music and to whatever. Publish and you're off to the races. And from now on, whenever you push an episode on your host, it'll just stream down via the RSS link to Spotify and Apple Music, whatever. And as soon as you publish the next episode, you could check your phone to see if it showed up in Spotify and be like, oh my God, it's the same thing that everybody else sees. They see my show in Spotify, right? That's a thing, right? It also feels really good to do that. So I highly recommend, once you've got it published, to just check it out in the different sites, because it just feels good to see that your podcast is on Spotify or on Apple Music or any of those things, right? Finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about just to wrap it up, just the idea that I know that, like, so as we can see from my lower third here, like, I get that there is this idea that there are too many podcasts out there, right? There's just like, we don't need another person talking about this stuff. And to a degree, I get it. I get it, obviously, because like I said, there's a lot of crappy content out there. There's a lot of people who have made podcasting their identity and believe that they can solve any problem by podcasting about it, right? These people exist, and they probably give the medium a bad name. But I don't know. It's just like, is radio overdone? Is YouTube overdone? There's a lot of bad YouTube content. There's a lot of great YouTube content, right? I mean, these are all just ways of expressing yourself, right? Podcasting is just another, it's just an audio way, well, audio now video plus whatever way of expressing yourself, right? Um, at some point, I believe there will be some sort of like balancing critical mass where um like over, because podcasting took a really long time to get legs, and so these last few years you've seen some people have massive success, usually already having some sort of like massive fan base that they've converted to listening to their podcast, and then had massive success in their podcast. Um, but that's not like forever, not, people aren't always going to be tuning in to an audio thing. They're not always going to have time for it. You're going to have people that move on. You're going to have a lot of, it's just, it's mercurial, as it's not, it's not static. It's not always going to be that way. You're not always going to have people seeing podcasting as being the get rich quick scheme. So eventually you're not going to have as much, it's going to mature, essentially is what I'm saying. It's going to mature like YouTubing has matured. If you look at early YouTube days versus now, and the quality of even just the type of content from early YouTube days was like cat videos, home videos, people throwing the ball around and getting doinked in the nuts and stuff like that. It was all like old YouTube was like boomer memes and stuff like that. And now YouTube is basically this generation's TV. Like the quality of the YouTube videos is better than television was for a long time. And podcasting is on its way there. It just hasn't had the need to mature as much, hasn't had the mass adoption to refine it and bring in the, all the new ideas and the, to break the echo chamber. There's been a lot of echo chamber. There's been a lot of the same people in podcasting for a long time, and it's slowly broadening, and people are slowly, but it will lose steam, and it will balance out and not be a fad anymore, and eventually it will just be another thing that people choose to engage with or choose not to engage with, much like TV or movies or books. It is already like those things. It's just at some point it won't also be as flooded, just like books currently. You can see that there's definitely books that are produced as get rich quick schemes and that kind of stuff, but there's lots of good quality content books out there too, right? So I think podcasts will balance out, and this whole idea of there being too many is, in my mind, like it's a recent thing, because it used to be that there was very few podcasts out there in the first place. It's a recent thing, but it's also I think it's going to be a short-lived thing. They're having their heyday for the last few years, for the next few years, and then it'll balance out, and there'll be some other fad, and we'll figure out some new thing will be the hot topic, right? It's just, that's how it works, right? So yeah, I just wanted to give you guys my lovely little podcast presentation that I did for work, and then just produce it, present it to you guys, because it was because I spent some good time coming up with all of that, and I felt like I wanted to repeat it elsewhere. Really, I just wanted to help teach some more folks here who might want to get into it, that it's really not that hard. And if you have opinions, or you have ideas, or you have knowledge that you want to share, if you have a history you want to share, if you have I don't know, if you have something you want to share in an audio format or a video format, nowadays video format, podcasting might be the way to start. It's very accessible. It's fairly cheap to get into, and it's very well documented. There's a million different videos on how to get started, and hopefully this gives you the basics on that. So